You can't walk into my office looking like that and expect to stay in this school, Principal Karen Miller said flatly, her voice sharp enough to cut through the hum of the hallway just outside. The words weren't a slip, they were deliberate. Across the desk sat Nia Harris, a 15-year-old sophomore at Lincoln High School in Atlanta. Her braids, neat, long, and beautifully arranged, framed her face with quiet pride. This morning, though, that pride was being treated like defiance. Karen Miller leaned back in her leather chair, arms folded across her gray blazer. Braids are a distraction. Against policy. You're suspended. Effective immediately. The clock on the wall ticked past 9:12 a.m. Students shuffled outside, their chatter muffled. But inside the office, those words landed like a gavel. Suspended for braids. Nia didn't speak at first. Her dark eyes blinked once, slowly, as if replaying the sentence in her mind. Suspended, not for fighting, not for skipping class, not for failing a test. For the way her hair grew and the way she wore it. Her mother's voice echoed in her head from that morning. Hold your head high. Don't let anyone make you small. She lifted her chin. My braids don't violate policy, she said carefully. Her voice didn't shake. It wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of every girl in that school who had been told their natural expression was a problem. Karen smirked. I wrote the policy and I say they do. Sitting in the corner of the office, Assistant Principal Daniel Foster shifted uncomfortably. He was in his early 40s, the kind of man who avoided confrontation by pretending to be invisible. His pen tapped nervously against a yellow legal pad. Karen, he said cautiously, maybe we should review the handbook. No, Karen cut him off. I've reviewed it enough. This is my school, my rules. Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line. He lowered his eyes. Nia's hands tightened around the straps of her backpack. She reached into the front pocket and pulled out her phone. Who are you calling? Karen demanded. My mom. You're in my office. You don't get to make calls until we're done. But Nia had already pressed the number. It rang twice. Then a voice answered. Baby, you okay? It was LaToya Harris, her mother. Mom, Nia said, keeping her tone steady. Principal Miller says I'm suspended because of my braids. Silence on the line, then a sharp intake of breath. Put her on. Karen stiffened. I don't take instructions from parents over the phone. Nia held the phone out. She wants to talk to you. Karen snatched it, pressed it to her ear. Mrs. Harris, your daughter is out of dress code. She's disruptive. End of story. On the other end, LaToya's voice rose, steady but furious. You're suspending my child for wearing braids? You know that's protected under the Crown Act. You know this, don't you? Karen's jaw tightened. This is my building. I decide what disrupts learning. Daniel shifted again. The words hung heavy now. The Crown Act. He'd heard of it. Georgia's legislature had debated it just last year. It explicitly prohibited discrimination against natural hairstyles, including braids. He looked at Karen. She's right. The Crown Act applies here. Karen snapped her fingers at him. Stay out of this. But it was too late. The crack had formed. Word travels fast in high school. By 9:25, half a dozen students were lingering outside the principal's office whispering. Ebony Johnson, a junior with tight curls pulled into a puff, pressed her ear closer to the door. She's suspending Nia, Ebony muttered. For her braids, another voice answered. The murmurs spread. A tall boy with a green backpack, Malik Green, shook his head. That's foul. We can't let that slide. The office door opened. Karen stepped out, phone still in her hand, lips pressed tight. Everyone back to class. Now. But the students didn't move. Their eyes stayed locked on Nia, who stood quietly inside the office doorway, her braids catching the fluorescent light. She didn't cry, she didn't lower her head, she just stood. Karen mistook that silence for weakness. She raised her voice. Go home, Nia. You're suspended for a week. Come back when your hair isn't a distraction. Gasps rippled through the hallway. Ebony's eyes widened. Malik muttered under his breath, she's gonna regret that. Nia adjusted her backpack strap and said only 3 words. I'm not leaving. Down the hall, LaToya Harris had already hung up the phone. She dialed another number immediately. It rang once. Auntie? Nia's mother said quickly. It's happening. They suspended her over her braids. On the other end, the voice of Denise Harris, the state attorney general, was calm but sharp. "What's the principal's name?" "Karen Miller." There was a pause, then, "Stay put. I'll handle it." Inside the office, Karen Miller dropped the phone back on her desk. "You think your mother scares me?" she sneered. Nia's eyes narrowed. "She wasn't the only one on that call." Karen's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" But Nia didn't answer. She just took her seat again, silent, composed. Daniel looked from one to the other. Something was shifting and he knew it. By 10 a.m., the superintendent's office had received a call from the Attorney General's office demanding immediate clarification on Lincoln High's hair policy. By 10:15, 3 reporters were calling the district's communications director. By 10:30, Karen Miller still didn't know her morning had already turned into a statewide scandal. Because for the first time, Lincoln High wasn't just another American public school with a strict principal. It was the epicenter of a fight that was about to ignite far beyond its hallways. And at the center of it sat a 15-year-old girl who refused to bow her head. The bell rang for second period, but no one moved. Students still clustered in the hallway outside the principal's office, their voices a low hum of disbelief. Phones were out. Messages were already traveling across group chats faster than teachers could say, "Classroom." Inside the office, Nia Harris sat perfectly still in her chair. Her backpack leaned against the desk, her braids spilling over her shoulders like quiet defiance. Principal Karen Miller stood at the window, arms crossed, watching the students gather outside. "You see this?" Karen muttered to Assistant Principal Daniel Foster. "They think this is a protest. I'll shut it down before it spreads." Daniel hesitated. "Maybe if we de-escalate." Karen spun around. "De-escalate?" "She disobeyed policy. She refused to leave when I told her to. That's insubordination." But Daniel's eyes flicked toward Nia. He saw her calm expression, the way she didn't raise her voice, didn't argue. It wasn't insubordination. It was dignity. "Open the door!" a student voice shouted. It was Ebony Johnson, her face flushed with anger. Karen stormed over and yanked the door open. "Back to class," she barked. Ebony didn't flinch. "Why is she suspended? For braids? That's her culture. That's who she is." Karen's jaw tightened. "Hair is not culture. It's appearance. And appearances matter here." A hush spread through the hallway at those words. Students exchanged looks. Malik Green shook his head slowly. "She really said that," he whispered to the crowd. Karen's words weren't just discipline anymore. They were confirmation of something deeper, something students had felt but never heard so plainly before. At 10:45, the office door burst open. LaToya Harris walked in, her heels clicking against the tile floor, her expression stormy. "You suspended my daughter over her braids?" she demanded. Karen didn't blink. "Your daughter is in violation of school appearance standards." LaToya laughed, sharp and bitter. "Show me where in your handbook it says braids are banned. Go ahead, I'll wait." Karen's lips pressed into a thin smile. "The handbook states students must maintain a professional appearance. Braids don't qualify." LaToya turned to Daniel. "Is that true?" Daniel shifted in his chair. "The handbook doesn't mention braids." His voice was low, but clear. The crowd outside the office roared. Phones rose higher. Someone shouted, "It's on video!" Karen slammed the door shut again, blocking the view. "You people twist everything," Karen snapped. "This isn't about race. This is about discipline." LaToya's eyes narrowed. "You just suspended a black child for wearing a protective hairstyle. That's race. That's bias. And you know it." Nia's voice cut through the tension. Calm, controlled. "You don't get to erase me because I don't fit your picture of what's professional." Karen turned sharply. "Enough!" But the authority in her tone didn't land the way it used to. By lunch period, every student in Lincoln High knew what had happened. The phrase "suspended for braids" was trending in hashtags across local social media. Parents began arriving, called by their children who texted frantically from the cafeteria and library. The superintendent's office phones rang nonstop. Teachers whispered in corners. And in the middle of it all, Karen Miller tried to hold her ground. She called the district office. This is being blown out of proportion, she insisted. The student is defiant, that's all. But even as she spoke, her words were already being contradicted by a dozen videos filmed in the hallway, students narrating, voices breaking, describing exactly what they saw and heard. At 12:30, the district superintendent, Richard Owens, walked into the school. His suit was wrinkled, his tie crooked, but his presence commanded attention. He went straight to Karen's office. "What's going on here?" he asked, eyes scanning the crowded hallway. Karen gestured toward Nia. "She's suspended. She refused to comply with appearance policy." Owens looked at Nia, then at LaToya, then back at Karen. "For braids?" Karen's face hardened. "For disruption." Owens didn't answer immediately. He stepped outside the office where students and parents had gathered. Their eyes locked on him, waiting. He cleared his throat. "This is under review. Please return to class." But no one moved. The silence was louder than shouting. At 1 p.m., Denise Harris, the state attorney general, stepped out of her office in downtown Atlanta. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved forward. A reporter shouted, "Is it true your niece was suspended for wearing braids?" Denise didn't flinch. "What's true is that no child should be punished for embracing their culture. What's also true is that this state passed legislation to ensure exactly that. And what's about to be true is accountability." The reporters erupted. Headlines formed before she even finished speaking. Inside the principal's office, Karen's phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from the district, emails from the press, parents demanding answers. Daniel finally spoke up. "Karen, this isn't going away. The attorney general is involved." Karen snapped. "I don't care if the president is involved. This is my school." But her voice didn't sound as steady as before. It cracked at the edges, betrayed by the rising pressure. Nia sat quietly, her hands folded on the desk. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't stormed out. She had simply stayed. And that stillness spoke louder than Karen's authority. By late afternoon, the crowd of parents and community members outside the school had grown. Some carried handmade signs. Others brought cameras. Local news vans parked at the curb. One man, Clarence Robinson, an elder in the community, stepped forward to speak. His voice was gravelly but strong. "I've lived in this neighborhood 50 years. I've watched our kids criminalized for their skin, their voices, and now their hair. Not today. Not this child." The crowd cheered. Inside, Karen's office windows rattled faintly from the sound. At 3 p.m., Superintendent Owens returned with a statement drafted hastily by the district's legal team. He read it aloud in the cafeteria where hundreds of students had gathered. "Lincoln High values diversity and inclusion. We are reviewing the situation regarding the suspension of student Nia Harris to ensure compliance with district and state policy." The words were polished, but the students weren't impressed. Ebony shouted from the back, "That's not enough!" The crowd echoed her. "Not enough, not enough!" Owens folded the paper. His face was pale. He hadn't expected resistance this strong. At 4 p.m., a black SUV pulled up in front of Lincoln High. Cameras swarmed. The door opened, and Attorney General Denise Harris stepped out. She wore a navy suit, her hair pulled back, her expression unshakable. The crowd parted as she walked to the front doors. She didn't raise her voice, didn't wave. She simply entered the building, trailed by reporters who were held back at the entrance. Inside, she went straight to the principal's office. Karen looked up, startled. "You can't just barge in here." Denise closed the door behind her. "I'm not here as family. I'm here as the chief law officer of this state, and you've got a problem." Karen swallowed hard. Denise placed a folder on the desk. "The Crown Act, page 3, section 2. It prohibits discrimination against protective hairstyles, including braids. You suspended my niece in direct violation of state law." Karen's lips parted. I interpreted the policy differently." Denise leaned forward. "Interpretation doesn't give you the right to strip children of their dignity. What you did wasn't discipline. It was bias." Silence fell over the room. Even Daniel sat frozen, his pen motionless above the pad. Denise's voice sharpened. "You thought this was just another day at school. It's not. It's the day your judgment faces the law." Nia lifted her head, meeting her aunt's eyes. For the first time all day, she smiled. The walls of Lincoln High's principal's office had never felt so small. The hum of voices outside grew louder by the minute. Parents, students, even strangers from the neighborhood who had come after hearing whispers of what happened. Inside, the air was heavy. Principal Karen Miller stood behind her desk, arms stiff at her sides. Across from her, Attorney General Denise Harris sat with a folder open, her niece Nia Harris at her side. Assistant Principal Daniel Foster remained in the corner, caught between two worlds, loyalty to his boss and the reality pressing down around him. Karen's voice was sharp. "You have no right barging into my office and threatening me. I run this school." Denise didn't raise her voice. "You don't run above the law." Denise tapped the folder. "Here it is in writing. The Crown Act, passed to prevent exactly this kind of suspension. You didn't just overstep policy, you broke the law, and you humiliated my niece in the process." Karen scoffed. "You think bringing lawyers into a school is going to fix discipline? This is about keeping order." Denise's eyes sharpened. "Order or control? There's a difference." Daniel swallowed hard. He knew this was bigger than school rules now. He'd sat through enough district trainings to recognize when administrators crossed the line. Karen had crossed it publicly, loudly, and in front of dozens of witnesses. Karen's phone buzzed again on her desk. She ignored it. Denise leaned back, studying her. "You've done this before, haven't you?" Denise asked. "This isn't the first child you've targeted over hair." Karen's lips pressed tight. She didn't answer. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. His pen scratched faintly against his pad. Finally, he spoke. "There were other cases, quiet ones. They never reached the district office." Karen spun toward him. "You keep your mouth shut." But the words had already landed. By 5 p.m., the cafeteria had turned into an impromptu town hall. Parents filled the tables. Students lined the walls. Teachers clustered near the doors. The local news had set up cameras in the corner, cords snaking across the floor. Superintendent Richard Owens stood at the front, sweat beading at his temple. "We are here to listen to concerns," he said nervously. "We understand emotions are high." From the back, a parent shouted, "You suspended a child for braids. That's not emotions, that's injustice." The room erupted, phones lifted high. The microphones caught every word. One by one, students stepped forward. Ebony Johnson clutched the microphone, her voice trembling but strong. "I've been told my puff was too big. I've been told to tame my hair. They say it's about rules, but it's not. It's about us." Next, Malik Green spoke. "Every time we walk in here, they look at us different. Nia just had the courage to say no, and they punished her for it." The crowd cheered. Teachers shifted uncomfortably. Some clapped quietly. Others avoided eye contact. Owens raised his hands. "Please, please, I assure you, this will be reviewed thoroughly." But the crowd wasn't satisfied. "Reviewed?" Clarence Robinson the elder stood up, his deep voice cutting through the noise. "We don't need a review. We need accountability." The chants began. "Accountability, accountability." Owens looked to the side of the room, where Denise Harris had just entered with Nia and LaToya. The crowd hushed instantly, all eyes turning toward her. Denise walked to the front, her heels steady against the linoleum. She didn't raise her voice, but the room listened. "My niece was suspended today for wearing braids. That's not disruption. That's identity. That's culture. And it's protected by law in this state." She paused, scanning the room. "This isn't just about one student. This is about every child who has been told they don't belong because of who they are. That ends today." The crowd erupted in applause. Even some teachers clapped openly now, no longer hiding their discomfort with Karen's decision. Owens shifted awkwardly beside her. "Attorney General Harris, with all respect," she cut him off. "Respect is earned. Right now, this district hasn't earned it." Karen finally entered the cafeteria, her posture stiff, her face pale. Boos rang out immediately. She raised her hands. "You're all misinterpreting what happened. This was about policy, not prejudice." A student shouted, "We were there, we heard you." Another yelled, "You called her hair unprofessional." Karen's voice cracked. I was trying to maintain standards." Denise stepped forward. "You humiliated a child for honoring her culture. That's not a standard, that's discrimination." The silence that followed was crushing. Cameras zoomed in. Karen's career was unraveling in real time. Richard Owens cleared his throat, desperate to regain control. "We take these allegations seriously. A full investigation will be conducted." But Denise wasn't finished. "No. An investigation drags on for weeks while children sit at home punished for existing. This is not a matter for internal review. This is a matter of law, and my office will be pursuing it." Gasps filled the cafeteria. Phones buzzed. Twitter feeds lit up. Karen staggered slightly, clutching the edge of a table. You can't criminalize me for enforcing rules." Denise's voice sharpened. "You enforced bias, and that is criminal." One teacher, Laura Green, finally stepped forward, her voice hesitant. "I've heard comments in staff meetings about hairstyles, accents, even names. We were told to guide students into looking professional, but it always meant the same kids. The black kids." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Other teachers looked down at their shoes. Some nodded reluctantly. Denise seized the moment. "Thank you for your honesty. Silence enables bias. Speaking truth dismantles it." Karen's face flushed deep red. "You're turning this into a circus. This is a school, not a courtroom." Denise didn't flinch. "When justice walks into a school, it becomes both." Clarence Robinson raised his hand. "My granddaughter left this school 2 years ago after being written up for dreadlocks. We stayed quiet then. That was our mistake. We're not staying quiet now." The crowd roared in agreement. The cafeteria shook with chants. "Not quiet now! Not quiet now!" Karen looked around, realizing she had no allies left. Even Daniel avoided her eyes. Denise turned to Owens. "Superintendent, you have 2 choices. Stand behind discrimination or stand with the children you're supposed to protect." Owens's voice wavered. I will review this personally." "No," Denise said firmly. "You'll reverse the suspension today, in front of this room, right now." The room held its breath. Owens's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie. He glanced at Karen, who shook her head violently. "Don't you dare!" she hissed. But Owens saw the cameras, the parents, the attorney general, the law. He swallowed hard. "The suspension is rescinded." The room erupted in cheers. Students screamed with joy. Parents clapped. Nia sat quietly, her braids shining under the fluorescent lights, her expression calm but resolute. Karen's voice cracked. "You can't overrule me like this. I'm the principal. I have authority." Denise turned to her. "Authority isn't immunity. You've abused your power, and the law doesn't protect abuse." Karen's shoulders slumped. The crowd's eyes pierced her like glass. For the first time all day, she looked small. As the cafeteria emptied, reporters rushed outside to broadcast the breaking news. Attorney General confronts principal over braid suspension. Law cited, suspension rescinded. Parents hugged their children. Students high-fived each other in the parking lot. Teachers whispered nervously about what Monday would look like. Inside, Denise leaned down to Nia. "You handled this with strength most adults can't manage." Nia smiled faintly. "I just didn't want to back down." Denise squeezed her hand. "And you didn't." The whole state saw it. But Denise knew the fight wasn't over. This wasn't just about one suspension. It was about a culture that had thrived quietly in schools for decades. She closed the folder in her hand and said softly to her niece, "Tomorrow we start rewriting the rules. Not just here. Everywhere." And as the last echoes of cheering drifted through the halls of Lincoln High, Principal Karen Miller sat alone in her office, staring at her desk, realizing she was no longer in control, not of her school, not of her career, not even of her own narrative. The balance of power had shifted, permanently. The morning after the suspension was overturned, Lincoln High no longer looked like a school. It looked like the center of a storm. News vans lined the curb. Satellite dishes spun toward the sky. Parents dropped their kids off slowly, watching reporters swarm the sidewalks. Signs reading, "Braids are not a crime" and "Protect our children" covered the fences. Inside the building, whispers traveled faster than the bell. Students pointed at cameras, at microphones, at each other. Everyone knew their school was now a headline. Principal Karen Miller sat alone in her office, staring at her computer screen. Her inbox had exploded overnight. Hundreds of emails, some demanding her resignation, others praising her for holding the line. She scrolled through message after message, her hands trembling. The local news ran a headline across the screen in the corner of her office. Attorney General Harris confronts principal over braid suspension. Her picture filled the frame, frozen mid-shout, her mouth open, her eyes narrowed. She slammed the laptop shut. "They're destroying me," she whispered. Downtown, in a glass-paneled conference room at the state capitol, Denise Harris addressed her staff. "This is not about one principal. This is about a pattern," she said firmly. "We've received dozens of calls since yesterday, parents telling us their kids were sent home for braids, locks, twists. Some of these cases never made it past the front office. That ends now." An aide slid a folder across the table. "We've identified 8 schools in the last 2 years with similar complaints. None escalated." Denise opened the folder, scanning the names. "We're launching a formal inquiry. Start with Lincoln High." Her staff nodded. They knew what that meant. Subpoenas, testimonies, legal exposure. At Lincoln High, students held an impromptu assembly in the gym. Posters covered the bleachers. Voices echoed across the hardwood floor. Ebony Johnson took the microphone. "This isn't just about Nia, it's about all of us. They tell us we're distracting when we're just being ourselves. That's not discipline, that's discrimination." The crowd cheered, phones recorded. Local activists stood in the back, nodding. Malik Green stepped forward. "If they can suspend her today, they can suspend us tomorrow. We can't let them." The gym erupted again, the sound rolling like thunder. Superintendent Richard Owens sat in his district office, the phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, I understand. Yes, we'll cooperate." Of course, Attorney General Harris has authority. He hung up, his face pale. His assistant leaned in. "What's happening?" Owens rubbed his temples. "The state is opening an inquiry. They're coming after us, not just Karen. If this spreads, every suspension in the last 5 years is about to be reviewed." His assistant swallowed hard. "That could destroy the district." Owens nodded slowly. "Or it could save it. Depends which side we stand on." In the teacher's lounge, the staff was split. Laura Green, the English teacher who spoke out, sipped her coffee with a shaky hand. "We all knew this was wrong. We just stayed quiet." A history teacher shook his head. "She broke the rules. You back the principal or the school falls apart." Laura's voice sharpened. "The school already fell apart. We just pretended it was fine." Silence followed. For the first time, the staff realized they weren't just debating a student's hairstyle. They were debating the future of their profession. By noon, Karen Miller had found her voice again. She called a press conference outside the school, standing stiffly at the podium with a handful of parents who supported her. "This isn't about race," she insisted, cameras flashing. "This is about maintaining order and discipline. Schools can't run if students disregard standards." A reporter shouted, "Principal Miller, are you aware that the Crown Act prohibits what you did?" Karen's jaw tightened. "The Crown Act is vague. I was enforcing my district's policy." Another reporter pressed, "Do you stand by the suspension?" Karen hesitated. The cameras zoomed closer. "Yes," she said finally, her voice thin. "I stand by it." The word spread instantly, broadcast live, replayed on social media within minutes. And just like that, the line was drawn. Denise Harris watched the press conference from her office. She didn't flinch. She simply turned to her communications director. "Draft a statement," she said. "Make it clear, the law isn't vague. The law is explicit. And when a principal publicly admits to violating it, that's evidence." Within the hour, her statement hit the airwaves. "The Crown Act is not optional. It is the law of this state. Any administrator who disregards it not only endangers their students but also their career. No child should ever be punished for their natural expression." The contrast was stark. Karen's defiance against Denise's authority became the story. That evening, the school board convened an emergency meeting. The room overflowed with parents and students, news crews lining the walls. Richard Owens sat at the center, flanked by board members. Karen sat stiffly at one end of the table, her eyes darting nervously between cameras. Denise Harris sat at the other end, calm and steady. Owens cleared his throat. "We are here to address the events at Lincoln High." From the back, a voice shouted, "Address it? You need to fix it." Applause erupted. The gavel banged against the table, but the noise didn't die. One by one, parents approached the microphone. "My daughter was told her twists were unkempt. My son was written up for his locks being too long. My niece was told to cut her braids or stay home." Each testimony landed like a hammer. The board shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Finally, Denise stood. "This is not a misunderstanding. This is a pattern of punishing black children for being black, and it has gone unchecked for far too long." The room erupted in cheers. Cameras flashed. Karen's face paled. When it was her turn, Karen's voice shook. "I never intended to discriminate. I was enforcing standards." Denise leaned forward. "Standards are not an excuse for bias. Your job is to educate, not to erase." The room went silent. For the first time, Karen had no response. The board chair finally spoke. "Given the evidence presented and the public admission of a violation of state law, the board has no choice but to place Principal Miller on administrative leave pending investigation." Gasps filled the room. Karen's mouth fell open. "You can't!" But the gavel struck again. It was done. As the meeting adjourned, parents embraced their children. Students cheered. Reporters rushed to file breaking news. Principal suspended after braid controversy. Outside, Denise placed a hand on Nia's shoulder. "This isn't just about today. It's about tomorrow, and every child who walks into a school without fear." Nia looked up at her aunt. "Do you think it will really change?" Denise smiled faintly. "It already has. The moment you refused to leave that office, you changed it." Karen returned to her office late that night, escorted by security to collect her things. The hallways were dark, the posters from earlier still taped to lockers. "Braids are beautiful. Protect our kids." She pulled her family photo from her desk, her hands shaking. Her authority, her reputation, her career, all of it had collapsed in less than 24 hours. And she knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something larger, something she couldn't stop. At midnight, national news anchors reported on the case. Civil rights groups issued statements. Hashtags surged online. And across living rooms in America, parents looked at their children's hair, their braids, their curls, their twists, and realized this wasn't just about Lincoln High. It was about all of them. The cafeteria gavel may have silenced the crowd, but it didn't end the fight. Principal Karen Miller had been placed on leave, yes, but the suspension of Nia Harris had already ignited something bigger. The community demanded more than a temporary measure. They wanted justice, and they wanted it tested in court. Within 48 hours, the school board received a formal notice from the Attorney General's office. Lincoln High's suspension policy would be subject to judicial review. For the first time in years, the district wasn't just answering to parents, it was answering to the law. Every local broadcast led with the story. Anchors spoke in solemn tones. Did Lincoln High break the law? Did a principal's bias expose a deeper rot in the system? National outlets followed. Morning shows debated whether dress codes were just cover for racial profiling. Commentators split along predictable lines, some calling it overdue accountability, others framing it as an attack on discipline. And everywhere Nia went, grocery stores, sidewalks, even church, strangers recognized her. Some clapped her on the back, thanking her for her courage. Others whispered criticisms under their breath. Through it all, Nia kept her composure. She walked into school with her backpack and her braids, quiet but unshaken. That calm, more than any speech, kept the story alive. From her home office, Karen Miller drafted her appeal. "They're trying to ruin me," she said bitterly to her lawyer, voice sharp with exhaustion. "I enforce the rules. If they strip principals of authority, schools will collapse." Her lawyer, an older man with a gray mustache, adjusted his glasses. "The problem isn't discipline, Ms. Miller. It's that you enforce the wrong thing." Karen slammed the desk. "I won't be their scapegoat. I'll fight this in court." And with that, her decision was sealed. She wasn't leaving quietly. Superintendent Richard Owens paced his office, watching the phones light up. Parents demanded answers. Reporters camped on the front lawn. Teachers argued in hushed tones over whether Karen had crossed a line or been unfairly targeted. Owens sighed. "We can't hold this off much longer," he told his deputy. "The Attorney General is coming for us, and the board knows it. We need to prepare for a courtroom battle." The deputy frowned. "Do we stand with Karen?" Owens shook his head. "We stand with whichever side keeps this district alive." Meanwhile, the students staged their own protest. On a crisp Monday morning, hundreds arrived at school with braids, twists, curls, and locks styled proudly. Boys and girls alike filled the hallways with a quiet show of unity. The faculty froze. No one dared write referrals. No one dared speak. In the cafeteria, Ebony Johnson raised her voice. "We don't need signs. We don't need chants. Our hair is the protest." The message spread across social media instantly. Our hair, our right. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was visible, undeniable, and impossible to discipline away. At the state capitol, Denise Harris sat with her legal team. Files and depositions covered the table. "We'll start with Lincoln High, but this isn't just about one school," she said. "We're building a case that will expose a pattern across districts. If we win here, it sets precedent." Her aide leaned forward. "What about Karen Miller's claim that the handbook supports her?" Denise didn't blink. "Then we'll show how handbooks are being weaponized, and once the judge sees the testimony, no handbook will protect bias." By Friday afternoon, the county clerk confirmed it. A public hearing would be held in 2 weeks to determine whether Lincoln High's suspension violated state law. The announcement sent shockwaves through the city. Parents booked time off work. Reporters circled the date on calendars. Students whispered about it in hallways, calling it the trial of the Braids. Karen supporters organized too, gathering at a nearby church to pray and denounce what they called political bullying. But outside that same church, civil rights leaders rallied with equal passion. Signs waved high. "Dignity is not a disruption." The battle lines were drawn. Days before the hearing, Karen gave a tearful interview to a local station. Her voice cracked as she insisted, "I never intended to discriminate. I was upholding standards. Now I'm being vilified." The interviewer asked, "Would you suspend her again?" Karen hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, because if we don't hold the line, we lose control." The clip went viral. For some, it proved her conviction. For others, it sealed her fate. At home, Nia sat at the kitchen table, homework spread out. LaToya stirred a pot on the stove, her back tense. "You okay, baby?" she asked quietly. Nia shrugged. "I don't like cameras. I don't like people saying my name everywhere." Her Aunt Denise placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to like it. You just have to know this isn't about them. It's about you being free to walk into a classroom as yourself." Nia nodded slowly. "Then I'll keep walking." The evening before the hearing, the city buzzed. Downtown hotels filled with reporters. Protesters prepared their chants. Police readied barricades. Inside her bedroom, Nia braided her own hair again, strand by strand, steady hands defying the storm outside. Her aunt watched from the doorway. "You're ready?" Nia smiled faintly. "I was ready the day she told me to leave." And with that, the night closed over Atlanta, heavy with anticipation. So, what happens when a courtroom becomes the place where a child's dignity is weighed against a principal's pride? And what happens when the nation watches, waiting to see which one matters more? Because that's what's coming. And once that gavel falls, it won't just decide one's suspension. It could decide the future of every student who dares to walk into school wearing their culture with pride. The ruling in Fulton County didn't just end one suspension. It lit a fuse. By sunrise the next morning, headlines ran coast to coast. Teen wins braid battle in Georgia courtroom. Attorney General confronts principal in landmark case. Is your child's school breaking the law? Every parent who had ever questioned a dress code pulled out their district handbook. Every student who had been told to fix their hair replayed those words with new clarity. And every reporter wanted one thing: Nia Harris. The front lawn of the Harris family's modest Atlanta home turned into a staging ground. Satellite trucks crowded the street. Cameramen leaned over fences. Producers begged for interviews. LaToya Harris stood at the porch, arms crossed, trying to hold the line. She's a child. She's going to school. She's not a politician. But Denise Harris knew the wave couldn't be stopped. She stepped in front of the cameras, her voice steady. My niece did not set out to become a symbol. She set out to learn. But when a system humiliates a child for her identity, and when that child refuses to bow her head, that's not just her story anymore. That's America's story. The microphones crackled. The statement traveled instantly. And just like that, Nia's face wasn't just on local news. It was on national morning shows framed by captions about courage and justice. By midweek, the family sat in the studio of a national network, lights glaring, cameras rolling. The host leaned forward. Nia, millions of people have seen your story. How did you stay so calm in that office with everyone telling you to leave? Nia's answer was simple. I didn't think staying calm was special. I just knew if I left, they'd win. The audience erupted in applause. The clip went viral within hours. For viewers across the country, her composure was striking. She wasn't fiery, she wasn't rehearsed. She was a teenager who refused to move, and that refusal carried more weight than shouting ever could. But the wave wasn't one-sided. Conservative commentators filled the airwaves with their own spin. This is what happens when activists run schools, one pundit sneered. Discipline is gone, students are in charge now. Another added, the Attorney General is abusing her power, turning a family issue into a political circus. Karen Miller herself sat down for a sympathetic interview with a cable news host. Her voice cracked as she said, I was only trying to protect standards. Now I'm being painted as a monster. I've lost everything. The host nodded solemnly. Do you regret enforcing the policy? Karen hesitated. No, I regret that no one backed me up. The clip drew sympathy from some, outrage from others. The divide sharpened. Back at the Capitol, Denise Harris didn't waste time. She convened a press conference with civil rights leaders, flanked by stacks of complaint files. In the last 2 weeks alone, we've received over 200 calls and emails from families across this state, she said. Children suspended, punished, or humiliated for protective hairstyles. This is not an isolated incident. This is systemic. Reporters scribbled furiously. One asked, what action will you take? Denise didn't blink. We are launching a statewide investigation into discriminatory discipline practices. Every district will be audited, every suspension will be reviewed, and if violations are found, consequences will follow. The room buzzed. The message was clear. Lincoln High was only the beginning. At Lincoln High, the cafeteria buzzed with a different energy. Some students wore braids and twists proudly, like badges of defiance. Others whispered that the spotlight had gone too far. A group of parents formed a petition demanding Karen Miller's reinstatement. This was blown out of proportion, they argued. She was maintaining order. But for every signature they gathered, twice as many parents signed a counter-petition demanding permanent removal. The school board was caught in the crossfire. At one meeting, voices clashed in the parking lot. Signs waved in both directions. One side shouted, "Protect discipline." The other shouted louder, "Protect our kids." Inside the gym, Nia stood quietly as her peers chanted her name. But when the microphone was passed to her, she shook her head. This isn't about me, she said softly. It's about the next kid who walks in with braids or curls or locks and doesn't want to fight just to sit in class. Don't chant my name, chant theirs. The gym fell silent, then erupted again, this time with a new chant. For all of us, for all of us, Malik shouted from the bleachers. That's the movement right there. And for the first time, Nia smiled. Karen Miller refused to go quietly. She filed an appeal with the district, claiming she had been targeted unfairly and demanding reinstatement. In a bitter statement, she wrote, "If principals cannot enforce standards, schools will collapse. My career is being sacrificed on the altar of political correctness." Her words spread online, drawing both sympathy and ridicule, but behind the bluster, her allies were dwindling. Daniel Foster, once her silent assistant, submitted a sworn statement to the Attorney General's office, admitting he had witnessed biased discipline practices in staff meetings. "We were told to identify students who didn't fit the image," he wrote. "It always meant the same group." The evidence stacked higher. Karen's defenses crumbled further. Then came the call Denise had been waiting for. The U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights announced it would be opening its own review, citing potential violations of federal anti-discrimination laws. The story was no longer just Georgia's, it was America's. News anchors called it a watershed moment. Editorials compared it to landmark cases on school integration. Civil rights attorneys across the country prepared new filings. And in homes across the nation, parents braided their children's hair with new pride, knowing one girl's stand in a principal's office had changed the conversation. Late one evening, the Harris family sat around the dinner table. The cameras were gone, the crowd had faded, but the weight of the storm still hung over them. LaToya looked at her daughter. "Are you tired, baby?" Nia shrugged. "A little, but I'm okay." Denise leaned forward. "You don't have to be the face of this if you don't want to. You're still just a kid." Nia met her aunt's eyes. "I didn't ask for it, but if people are listening, maybe we can make sure it never happens again." Silence filled the table. Then LaToya reached across and took her daughter's hand. "That's all we wanted. That's all we ever wanted. So now, let me ask you something. If a 15-year-old girl can change the law just by refusing to move, what excuse do the rest of us have for staying silent? Because silence is how injustice survives. And when one voice finally breaks it, the whole room has to listen." The courtroom date loomed, but Lincoln High couldn't keep its walls from talking. Teachers whispered in hallways, staff members exchanged worried glances, and old files began surfacing. Files that revealed more than anyone wanted exposed. For the first time, silence was cracking. It started with Assistant Principal Daniel Foster. For weeks, he'd been torn between loyalty to his principal and the truth he'd seen firsthand. Late one evening, he sat in his car outside the Attorney General's office, hands trembling on the steering wheel. When he finally stepped inside, he carried a folder thick with notes. "Mr. Foster?" Denise's aide asked cautiously. He nodded. "I was there for all of it, and not just with Nia. There were others. I can't carry it anymore." He placed the folder on the table. Inside, records of discipline referrals, annotated meeting notes, and directives from Karen Miller about maintaining standards of professionalism. Every example targeted the same group, black students. "Why now?" the aide asked. Daniel swallowed hard. "Because I have a son who's about to start kindergarten, and I don't want him growing up in a system where his hair is treated like a crime." Word spread quickly that Foster had stepped forward. Within days, Laura Green, the English teacher, gave a sworn statement of her own. "In staff meetings, we were told to flag students whose appearance sent the wrong message. It always meant the same kids like Nia." Her voice cracked in the deposition room. "We told ourselves we were following orders, but silence makes us complicit. I won't be complicit anymore." Another teacher, a younger math instructor, echoed her testimony. "I saw a boy with dreadlocks written up 3 times in 1 week for disruption. Even though he never opened his mouth in class, the disruption was his existence." Each statement added weight to the case. The evidence wasn't just Nia's suspension anymore. It was a pattern, deliberate, systemic, and now undeniable. At the next board meeting, the tension was palpable. Reporters filled the back row, cameras pointed at the dais. Superintendent Richard Owens tried to steady the ship. "We are cooperating fully with the Attorney General's office," he said. But board member Elaine Carter, her voice sharp, cut him off. "Cooperating? We've been covering for years. I saw those buried complaints. Don't act like this started last month." Another board member slammed a fist on the table. "This is political theater," Elaine fired back. "No, this is accountability." The argument spilled into shouts, microphones picking up every word. The public, watching live on local television, saw the board not as leaders, but as a fractured group clinging to survival. Outside, parents packed the parking lot with handmade signs. Some read, "Protect the children." Others read, "Stand with Karen." 2 groups stood on opposite sides of the street, chanting back and forth. One side shouted, "Let kids be kids." The other answered, "Standards, not politics." Police lined the middle, keeping the peace. But the image was clear. Lincoln High was no longer just a school. It was a battlefield in America's cultural divide. Denise Harris reviewed the new files on her desk late into the night. Each document told the same story: biased language, arbitrary punishments, policies enforced selectively. She looked at her staff. This isn't just negligence, this is intent, and intent makes it stronger legally. An aide asked, "Do we move forward with charges against Karen Miller personally?" Denise paused. "Not yet. If we go too fast, they'll call it a witch hunt. We let the evidence speak. We build it brick by brick until even her defenders can't deny it." She closed the folder. But make no mistake, the bricks are already falling. Meanwhile, Karen sat at her dining table, her lawyer on speakerphone. "They're piling on," she said bitterly. "First Daniel, then Green, now everyone wants to paint me as a villain." Her lawyer's voice was calm but firm. "The problem isn't them, it's the paper trail. Those directives you gave in staff meetings, they're going to be hard to explain." Karen slammed her fist on the table. "They twisted my words. I never said target black students. I said maintain professionalism." The lawyer sighed. "But the pattern shows otherwise. Judges don't care about intentions when the outcomes are this clear." Karen's face flushed. For the first time, she saw her defenses thinning, her power shrinking. At Lincoln High, the students weren't done. They organized a walkout at noon on a crisp Thursday. Hundreds streamed out of classrooms, lining the football field with posters. On one side of the field, a banner read, "Dignity is our right." On the other, "Hair is not a disruption." Nia walked quietly among them, her braids swaying in the wind. She didn't speak into the megaphone. She didn't need to. Her very presence was enough to draw cheers. Reporters filmed the walkout from above, drones capturing the image of hundreds of kids spelling out the word "right" on the grass with their bodies. The footage aired nationwide that evening, the image seared into public consciousness. That night, Superintendent Owens held a press briefing. His voice trembled as he read from a prepared statement. "The district acknowledges the seriousness of the allegations. We will comply with all investigations and will implement immediate policy reviews." A reporter shouted, "Superintendent Owens, do you admit there was systemic bias in discipline practices?" Owens froze. Cameras zoomed in. The pause stretched long enough to feel like an answer. Finally, he muttered, "We admit mistakes were made." The clip spread instantly. "Mistakes were made" became the headline, a hollow phrase that satisfied no one. Behind the scenes, Denise's phone rang with a Washington, D.C. area code. "This is the Office for Civil Rights," the voice said. "We've been following your case. If you move forward, we'll consider opening a federal review of school discipline disparities statewide, possibly nationwide." Denise leaned back in her chair, a faint smile forming. "Then watch closely, because the evidence is only getting stronger." Through it all, Nia stayed steady. At night, she sat on her bed, scrolling through messages from kids across the country. "I got sent home for braids, too. My brother was told his locks made him look like a thug. They told me to straighten my hair or I couldn't walk at graduation." She read each one, her heart heavy. Then she whispered to herself, "This isn't just my story. It's ours." So what happens when silence finally cracks? When insiders step out of the shadows and admit what they saw? Does the system collapse, or does it finally rebuild into something stronger? Because at Lincoln High, the cracks weren't just showing anymore. They were spreading. And everyone, from the boardroom to the classroom, knew it was only a matter of time before the whole structure fell. By the time the court hearing opened its second week, the case had already outgrown Fulton County. It was no longer just about Nia Harris or Lincoln High. It was about every child whose dignity had been trimmed down, written up, or suspended in the name of professionalism. Washington had noticed. In a tall glass building in D.C., the Office for Civil Rights convened an emergency session. Around the table sat analysts, lawyers, and investigators flipping through files thick with complaints. One senior attorney set down a binder. "Georgia isn't an outlier. These cases are everywhere. Texas, Ohio, even California. The Harris case just put a spotlight on what's been ignored." The director nodded. If a state attorney general can drag a district into the light, so can we. Draft the paperwork. Nationwide review. The decision sent shockwaves through education circles. For the first time, the federal government wasn't just watching. It was preparing to act. At the same time, national civil rights organizations rallied around Nia's case. The NAACP filed an amicus brief. Legal defense fund attorneys offered support. At a press conference, one leader said, "This isn't about hair. This is about history, about centuries of being told our bodies don't belong in their spaces. Every braid, every lock, every curl is part of that history, and every punishment for it is part of that oppression." The crowd roared in agreement. Signs waved in the air. "Crown means freedom. Our culture. Our right." Back in Atlanta, Karen Miller sat at her kitchen table, the blinds drawn. Her phone buzzed with messages from reporters, her inbox full of hate mail and death threats. She clutched her lawyer's arm. "They're turning me into the face of racism. I'm not a racist. I was doing my job." Her lawyer sighed. "The problem isn't what you think you are. It's what the paper trail shows. And right now the evidence says bias." Karen's voice cracked. "Then I'll go public again. I'll tell my side." But when she tried, the cameras no longer painted her as a strong principal defending discipline. They painted her as a woman clinging to a collapsing defense. Every word she spoke was dissected, ridiculed, replayed. At Lincoln High, students prepared to testify at the next round of hearings. They gathered in the library after school, guided by community lawyers. "I was told to cut my twists or I couldn't go to prom," one senior revealed. "They said my braids made me look unkempt," another whispered. Nia sat among them, listening quietly. When it was her turn, she spoke with her usual calm. "They tried to erase us one by one, but if we speak together, they can't erase us all." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Superintendent Richard Owens faced his board with a grim update. "The federal government is circling. Civil rights groups are piling on. If we don't get ahead of this, we'll lose all control." One board member snapped, "Then fight back." Another countered, "Fight back? Against the Attorney General? Against Washington? That's suicide." The board erupted into arguments. For the first time, Owens realized the truth. They weren't debating whether the district was guilty. They were debating how much of themselves they could sacrifice before the walls closed in. At home, the Harris family struggled under the spotlight. Neighbors left flowers on their porch. Strangers sent letters of support. But the pressure mounted. LaToya whispered to her sister one night, "She's still a child. She shouldn't have to carry this." Denise answered firmly, "She's not carrying it alone. We are." Nia, sitting quietly at the table, lifted her head. "Maybe I was chosen for this. Not chosen like special, but chosen because I didn't leave when she told me to." Her aunt's eyes softened. "That's exactly why the world is listening." Television panels erupted. Politicians weighed in. Some senators praised the case as a turning point for civil rights. Others called it a distraction from real issues. One commentator sneered, "If you let students run schools with their hairstyles, what's next? Pajamas in class?" Another fired back, "This isn't about pajamas. This is about dignity. Do you understand the difference?" The split mirrored the nation itself, lines drawn not just over hair, but over whose humanity mattered. One evening, Laura Green appeared on live television. Sitting stiffly in a studio chair, she admitted what she had long hidden. "I stayed silent too long," she said, voice breaking. "I watched children punished for nothing more than being themselves. I told myself it wasn't my place. But silence is how injustice survives. I won't be silent anymore." The host leaned forward. "What made you speak out now?" Laura's eyes filled with tears. "Because if a 15-year-old girl has the courage to stand, what excuse do I have?" The clip spread instantly, played on every network. The next morning, the Department of Education released a formal statement. The Harris case raises serious questions about equity in American schools. We are launching a nationwide review of disciplinary codes to ensure compliance with federal anti-discrimination laws. The announcement hit like an earthquake. For the first time, school districts across the country scrambled to audit their own policies, terrified of being the next Lincoln High. Karen Miller watched the news from her couch, her hands trembling. The announcer's words pierced the silence. The Harris case sparking nationwide review. Her career wasn't just damaged, it was radioactive. Her phone buzzed again, not reporters this time, but old colleagues cutting ties. "Sorry, Karen, I can't be associated with this." She threw the phone against the wall, her eyes filling with rage. "They're burying me alive." But in truth, she had dug the hole herself. Meanwhile, Denise walked into her office to find her staff buzzing. "Calls from 3 states, her aide said breathlessly. "They want you to consult on their lawsuits." Denise nodded. "We'll help. But make sure everyone remembers, this started with Naya. Keep her name at the center." That evening, as cameras swarmed again, Denise stood beside her niece. She didn't set out to lead a movement, but sometimes history chooses its messengers. And when history knocked, Nia didn't walk away. The applause was deafening. So, here's the question. What happens when one girl's braids challenge an entire nation's definition of discipline? Do the walls of old policies hold, or do they crumble under the weight of truth? Because now, this isn't just Georgia's fight, it's America's, and the whole country is watching to see what comes next. The courthouse stood like a fortress that morning, its marble columns bathed in the gray light of dawn. By 7 a.m., the steps were already crowded, students holding signs, parents chanting, reporters jostling for position. Some carried banners that read, "Crown, Dignity." Others waved handmade posters with Nia's face, her braids drawn in bold lines like a banner of resistance. Police erected barricades, guiding the streams of people into neat rows. On one side, civil rights groups rallied with chants of unity. On the other, a smaller but loud group of Karen Miller's supporters demanded, "Discipline first." The clash of voices echoed against the stone walls, a chorus of America's divide. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Every bench was filled, cameras perched like vultures, pens scratching across reporters' notepads. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmur. "All rise." Judge Miriam Lawson, a woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes behind rimmed glasses, took her seat. The gavel struck once, silencing the room. "We are here to determine whether Lincoln High School, under Principal Karen Miller, violated the state's Crown Act by suspending student Nia Harris. Counsel, you may proceed." Attorney General Denise Harris rose smoothly. Her navy suit was crisp, her voice measured but firm. "This case is not about rebellion. It is not about disruption. It is about dignity. A 15-year-old child was suspended for the way she wore her hair, braids, explicitly protected under state law. This was not an accident. This was bias, and the evidence will prove it." She sat down without flourish. The power was in her restraint. Karen's lawyer, a weary man with thinning hair, rose next. "My client enforced school policy in good faith. She acted to maintain order and professionalism, not to discriminate. This was a misunderstanding, blown out of proportion by politics and media frenzy." His words rang hollow against the energy of the room. Even Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The prosecution called Daniel Foster. He walked to the stand, hands clasped, eyes heavy. "Mr. Foster," Denise began, "you were the assistant principal at Lincoln High during the incident?" "Yes." "And did you witness Principal Miller suspending Nia Harris for braids?" "Yes." His voice cracked slightly. "I heard her say braids were unprofessional." Gasps rippled through the room. Cameras clicked furiously. Denise leaned in. "Had you heard similar language before?" Daniel nodded. "In staff meetings. We were told to watch students whose appearance didn't fit the image. It always meant the same students. Karen's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled. The testimony stood. Next came Laura Green, the English teacher. Her hands trembled as she swore in, but her voice steadied as she spoke. "I watched kids punished for nothing but their hair. I stayed silent for too long, but silence is complicity, and I won't be complicit anymore." Denise asked softly, "What made you decide to speak up now?" Laura looked across the room at Naya. Because if a 15-year-old could sit in that office and refuse to move, what excuse did I have? The audience murmured in awe. Judge Lawson banged her gavel for order, but the impact lingered. One by one, students took the stand. Ebony Johnson. They told me my puff was distracting. I was pulled out of class for it. Malik Green. They said my locks made me look unkempt. I missed practice because of write-ups. Another student whispered through tears. They said I couldn't walk at graduation unless I straightened my hair. Each testimony stacked higher, each word a brick in the wall of evidence against Karen Miller. Finally, Karen herself took the stand. Her lawyer's voice was steady. Miss Miller, did you ever intend to discriminate? Karen shook her head quickly. Never. I only wanted to maintain standards. That's all. Denise rose. Miss Miller, whose standards? Karen blinked. Excuse me? Whose standards define what is professional? Whose image were you protecting? Because it wasn't the students sitting in this room. Karen's voice faltered. I was trying to prepare them for the real world. Denise's tone sharpened. By erasing who they are. The silence that followed was deafening. As testimony unfolded inside, the steps of the courthouse shook with chants. Braids are not a crime. Our culture, our right. News anchors reported live. Protesters waved signs. Drivers honked horns in solidarity as they passed. The image was broadcast nationwide, a courthouse divided by barricades, but a movement united in purpose. When Richard Owens was called to testify, sweat gleamed on his forehead. Superintendent, Denise began, were you aware of prior complaints about discriminatory discipline at Lincoln High? Owens hesitated. Yes, some complaints were filed. And what did you do with them? He shifted in his seat. They were reviewed. Denise pressed. Reviewed or buried? Owen's silence was answer enough. The courtroom erupted. At last, Nuya herself was called. She walked to the stand, braids falling neatly over her shoulders. She sat tall, her voice calm. I wasn't suspended for disruption, she said softly. I was suspended for being me. The room hushed. Her words needed no embellishment. Denise asked gently, why didn't you leave the office that day when she told you to? Nia's eyes lifted, steady. Because if I left, I'd be saying she was right, and she wasn't. Even the judge blinked slowly, moved by the quiet weight of the answer. Denise rose one last time. This case is not about rebellion. It's about recognition. Recognition that every child deserves to walk into school as themselves, without being punished for their culture. My niece's courage exposed not just one act of bias, but a system of silence. The law demands better, and today, so should we. Karen's lawyer followed, voice strained. This is being blown out of proportion. My client enforced policy, nothing more. If principals cannot maintain standards, schools will collapse. His words fell flat, drowned in the memory of testimony. Judge Lawson leaned back, her face unreadable. I will issue my ruling tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. The gavel struck. The courtroom erupted in noise. Cameras flashed. Parents wept. Students hugged each other. Outside, the crowd swelled, chanting louder, waiting for the final word. Inside, Nia walked out of the courtroom, her aunt at her side. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just walked, calm as always, as if she knew the truth already belonged to her. So here's the question. What happens when a gavel is poised to decide whether a child's identity is a disruption or a right? Tomorrow the answer will come. But tonight, the whole nation waits. And when that gavel falls, it won't just echo in a courtroom. It will echo in every classroom in America. The city of Atlanta woke restless that morning. Radios buzzed, televisions flickered, and phones lit up with reminders. 9 a.m., Fulton County Courthouse. the ruling everyone had been waiting for. By dawn, the courthouse steps were already filled. Students in uniforms, parents holding coffee, activists with megaphones, all shoulder to shoulder in the chill morning air. The chants began early. Our hair, our right. Justice for Nia. Inside, the tension was thicker than the air itself. Lawyers shuffled papers, reporters scribbled notes, cameras clicked at every movement. The wooden benches groaned under the weight of a packed gallery. And in the center of it all sat Nia Harris, her braids neat, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't fidget, she didn't whisper, she just waited. At precisely 9 o'clock, the bailiff called the court to order. Judge Miriam Lawson stepped into the room, her robe flowing, her expression firm. She took her seat, glanced once at the stack of files before her, and lifted her gavel. After careful consideration of testimony, evidence, and the requirements of state law, this court is prepared to issue its ruling. The gallery fell silent. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Judge Lawson's voice was steady. It is the opinion of this court that Lincoln High School, under the leadership of Principal Karen Miller, acted in direct violation of the Crown Act by suspending student Nia Harris on the basis of her hairstyle. This suspension was unlawful, discriminatory, and in conflict with the protections guaranteed by state law. Murmurs rippled through the room. Furthermore, Lawson continued, this court orders the immediate expungement of the suspension from Ms. Harris's record, the reinstatement of all students similarly disciplined, and the mandatory revision of district policy under state supervision. The gavel struck. For a moment, silence reigned. Then the room erupted. Applause thundered. Parents cheered. Students hugged each other, tears streaming down their faces. Reporters scrambled to file breaking news, and in the middle of it all, Nia simply sat still, her lips curving into the faintest of smiles. At the defense table, Karen Miller sat frozen. Her lawyer whispered frantically, but she didn't hear him. Her eyes stared ahead, glassy, as if she couldn't comprehend the words. When she finally stood, the boos from the gallery rained down. She tried to speak, to insist she was misunderstood, but her voice cracked. No one listened. Within hours, the district announced her termination. Her resignation letter never came. It wasn't needed. By evening, her name was trending nationwide, not as a respected educator, but as a cautionary tale. Her career was over. Superintendent Richard Owens stepped in front of cameras later that day, his face pale. "We accept the court's decision," he said stiffly. "The district will fully comply with the mandated reforms. Training will begin immediately. We will do better," but his words rang hollow. Parents weren't satisfied. Teachers whispered about his role in burying complaints. Whistleblowers pointed fingers higher than Karen. The community knew one ruling didn't erase years of silence, and so the calls grew louder. Clean house, accountability now. By nightfall, the Department of Education issued its own statement. Today's ruling affirms the principle that no child should be punished for embracing their cultural identity. Effective immediately, we will open a nationwide review of disciplinary policies to ensure compliance with federal law. The Harris case had gone national. What began in a small office at Lincoln High was now shaping federal policy across America. Back at Lincoln High, the students celebrated. The next morning, the hallways were filled with braids, twists, curls, and locks, more visible than ever before. Teachers smiled, some awkwardly, others with genuine pride. In the cafeteria, banners hung from the rafters. "Our hair, our right. Dignity wins." For once, the laughter wasn't nervous. It was triumphant. At a press conference, Denise Harris stood at the podium, her niece at her side. "This victory belongs not to me," she said firmly, "but to the children who refuse to bow their heads." Nia reminded us that justice is not won in silence. It's one. In standing still, in saying no, when everything tells you to go. This case is proof. Dignity is never a disruption. The applause rolled like thunder. That evening, the Harris family gathered on their porch. The cameras were gone. The chants had faded. For the first time in weeks, the air was quiet. LaToya looked at her daughter, tears brimming in her eyes. "You did it, baby." Nia shook her head. "We did it." Her aunt smiled softly. "History will remember your name, Nia. But I hope tomorrow you just get to be a kid again." Nia leaned back in the swing, her braids brushing against her shoulders, and whispered, "That's all I wanted in the first place." Across America, schools began rewriting their handbooks. Districts held emergency meetings. Teachers attended mandatory training. Parents braided their children's hair with new confidence, knowing no one could punish them for it again. And in every headline, in every broadcast, one name appeared: Nia Harris. Not as a victim, not as a disruption, but as proof that a child's refusal to move can shift the ground beneath an entire nation.